In an earlier video, I talked about what an inverse function was. And just as a quick reminder, an inverse function is basically finding a new equation that gives us the quick ability to say if I was given the answer or output, find the input value, okay? So essentially, if I knew what y was, could I solve for x? So for example, if I were to say this function is equal to 11, could I figure out what x was? And of course, you could just subtract 2 and then divide by 3. And that would give me my answer. So we would say that our inverse function is kind of those steps. It's like if you gave me that input or that answer, that 11, I would just subtract 2 from it and divide by 3. So those are inverses of one another. But we want to find a way to generalize that. And I might do that just a little bit differently than other math teachers do, but let me explain how I kind of find this inverse. I begin by just writing my equation like this. Y equals 3x plus 2, where y is the output and x is the input. And at that point, I just use my algebra to solve for x. Get x by itself. So I subtract 2 from both sides. I divide both sides by 3. And at the very end, because our function usually is said in the same variable, or our inverse rather is said with the same variable as our function, I simply swap my x and y, and I get this, x minus 2 over 3. Okay? Let's do a couple more examples. Let's say we had something like this. Well, first thing I would do if I'm going to solve for x is I would subtract 5 from both sides. And now I would multiply both sides by 3 in order to get rid of that. And the last thing we do, remember, I'm just going to write this way, is we swap our x and our y in order to write it as an inverse. Because, we just like it to have the same variable. So the inverse is going to be, I'm going to write it this way, an inverse, is 3x minus 15. Let's do another example. So if f is equal to the cube root of x squared plus 4, let's begin by just writing this as y equals, and I'm going to write, we've talked in earlier videos, it's easier to solve this, I think, with an exponential, fractional exponent than with roots. First thing I'm going to do, subtract 4. Now, how do we get rid of a 2/3 power? We put it to the 3/2 because then it becomes x to the first. Do that to the other side as well. And at the very end, we simply swap variables. Okay? So our inverse is going to be x minus 4 to the 3/2. Let's do this example. F is equal to 3 over x plus 2. So y is equal to 3 over x plus 2. Now I might think about kind of cross-multiplying here and saying y times x plus 2. And I'm just going to write it like this. I'm not going to distribute it. And remember, we're solving for y, so we could divide both sides by y. So now we've got x plus 2 equals 3 over y, and now we could just subtract 2 from both sides. And at the very end, we swap variables. So my inverse is 3 over x minus 2. Let's do another. Begin with rewriting. Now, I need to get rid of that square root. Of course, the way I do that is I square both sides. So now I've got y squared equals 5x plus 2. Subtract 2 from both sides. Divide both sides by 5. And at the very end, swap the variables. Now, I keep saying, at the very end, you will see some teachers that will say, swap them right away, and then just solve, and at the very end, you don't swap. That really doesn't make a difference. I just always like the consistency of saying, I am solving for the input value. That's what an inverse does. Okay, so always remember kind of to follow our steps here. Start by rewriting y equals your equation, if it's not already given that way, if it's given with a function like this. And then use all of your algebra bag of tools to solve for x. So in this case, I squared both sides to get rid of the root. Then I subtracted 2. Then I divided by 5. And at the very end, when you have x equals, you're basically saying, I now have a way of solving for the input. We swap back an x so that the inverse has the same variable as the function, but it really is just straight replacing. If this video helped you, please like and subscribe for more math help.